So hi, welcome to NeuroPride. Today I am joined with Denise to talk about something very close to my own heart, and that is how our LGBTQIA plus identities can intersect with our neurodiverse identities. So thank you so much for being here with us today. Would you like to do a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Denise. My pronouns are she, they, though I have a feeling that that may be in flux. Um, I my neurodiverse identity is ADHD, but again, that may change. We'll see. And I am bisexual, with a little pinch of demisexuality, which tends to inform a lot of my interactions with people. So yeah.
Uh, Brilliant. I'm also bisexual and demisexual and non-binary. And when I told the rest of the team that I was interviewing you, they're like, "You can be honest. Are you interviewing yourself?"
Yeah.
But just so everybody is aware, me and Denise have had this conversation, and both of us are very comfortable with the word queer. We know it does not apply to everyone, but this is a word that we're both comfortable with, so it may slip in throughout the conversation. Um, so, do you feel like your bisexuality, your gender, all this intersects with your neurodiversity?
Yeah, I've had multiple conversations. I'm sorry, it is I didn't realize how warm it was, and I'm like, I'm actually I think
You're
my
grand.
tablet's about to fall off. Right. Um, yes, and I've had this conversation multiple times with different people, and I I think that the sooner that we can view ourselves as multifaceted, the sooner that, especially as I mean, when I use the word queer, I mean it in a neurodiverse sense and also in a sexuality sense and romantic sense. I think the sooner that we as queer people can accept ourselves as soon as we view ourselves as multifaceted, we can start to accept those parts of ourselves and start integrating them back in. I know for me, I came out at 15 as bisexual, but I put myself back in. And I think a lot of bisexual people have had a similar experience where they don't understand, especially from I'm 31, so my generation, we were only sort of understanding what bisexuality was, but we didn't have any positive open examples within our own life or even on TV of what it would look like to move through the world as a bisexual person. So I've very unconsciously put myself back in the cupboard. You're making this up, and not understanding what the bi cycle was and how that informs the way we feel about things. um but talking about the bicycle, I find that even that experience of waking up one morning and thinking I haven't formed an attraction to a man or for a really long time. Does this mean I'm a lesbian now? And then maybe a couple of days later, it's like, oh no, 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 I'm definitely bi, because you'll see someone walk past and it's, oh yeah, absolutely, yes, no, I'm bi. And then suddenly, if maybe a couple of weeks later, it's like, I've been making this all up. I'm actually straight. I'm doing this for attention. But I even find that bisexuality feeds into, when I look back, it feeds into almost the way the ADHD brain works as well. And I'm not saying that everyone who experiences the bicycle is also ADHD or neurodiverse, but in my experience, that constant I've described my life as like one big question mark, and I feel like if my life was ever summed up, or if I was narcissistic enough to have a biopic created of me, I feel like it would just be a question mark of like, who am I? What is my place in the world? Why do I feel this way? And why do I react this way? And why do I have this feeling to such a range of peoples and persons? And also, why does it change constantly? Um, that's the best way that I can describe that from my experience of the intersection between my neurodiversity and my sexuality, because I kind of describe it as like waves. It kind of comes in and out and in and out, and no wave is ever the same. Um, So I find it to be constant questioning and trying to understand my own place in the world and who I am in relation then to other people. You can even tell, like I'm just like it's yeah. There's no shallow conversations with me, unfortunately, which is like typical ADHD. So
No, that's all brilliant. And you did mention the bicycle, and so for anybody that's not familiar with the bicycle, it is this term that we use to like for people that so many bisexuals experience this, and like I don't know anybody under the bi umbrella that doesn't experience this cycle of I'm bi, no, I'm straight, no, I'm gay, oh no, I'm bi again. It's just continuous. And then some of us will also have the, oh, well, I'm totally asexual thrown in there, this type of way. And I think while we use it to refer to bisexuality, the bicycle, I think actually so many of us experience it with our neurodivergencies as well. Like, so I'm autistic, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm autistic. No, I'm kidding myself. I'm really kidding myself. I must be neurotypical. No, maybe actually I have this other neurodivergency. Maybe I'm just broken, that type of way. And I don't like, I would never refer to somebody else as broken. But these are all thoughts that continuously, and when talking to other people, it seems to be very common also. Do you get that vibe?
said, sorry, I missed the last bit of what you said of the question.
Just do you get that vibe of like removing the bi from the cycle? We could have that translates into so many other things. Like we have the neurodivergent cycle of neurodivergent. No, I'm typical.
Yes, absolutely. Because it actually wasn't until, I would have known about these questions before we had the chat. And I was sitting for like 2 days being like, how do I answer this? And it wasn't actually until I sat in front of you where I'm like, actually, that cycle or the bicycle, you could call it the ND cycle, the neurodiverse cycle, of constant questioning. And I think that, because I've spent most of my life thinking I was neurotypical, I feel like that my brain has just went, I've lost. See, I was like mid sentence, and it's like, oh, I don't know my own name. So that's just happened. So I'm gonna try and reclaim what it was that I was trying to say. Um, so it was about neurotypical people, and yeah. So I've had people say to me, oh well, I'll say things like, I have to go in and out of a room multiple times. It's not when I leave in the morning, I do the same routine, not the same routine, I'm a little bit too chaotic for that, but the same routine every morning. And it's not until I either close my bedroom door, and then I'm like, fuck, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but like, fuck, I have to like go back in, and I realized I've forgotten this or that or whatever. Close the door again. No, I'm fine. I've got this. Go down the stairs, open the door to the front door. Well, it's not like close and lock the front door that I'm like, oh, for God's sake. Like and this is a constant every single morning. And people have said to me, it's like, oh, well, there's no, I experience that too. And I'm like, oh, and it's similar sort of experience when people say, well, everyone's a little bit bi. And I think it's their way of trying to be like, we accept you, it's okay. And it's like, no, it's low key invalidating. And I feel like if you are queer, and you are queer and on some form neurodiverse, um, you will spend most of your life questioning where you fit, because the society is not, it is not geared towards anyone who doesn't fit into a certain mold. So I feel like if you have been if you don't question and you are so you're like, I'm totally okay with my gender identity. You won't even have to have that thought of I'm okay with my gender. You just know. It's I suppose that's what frustrates me when people are like, well, especially people who maybe not officially yet diagnosed with a neurodiversity or whatever, people um they think, well, clearly you're just either you're looking attention, or you don't really know, because no, has anyone diagnosed you? And that, oh my God. And it's, I think the fact that if you're even questioning your gender, or if you're even questioning your sexuality, if you're questioning how you interact and how your whole sense of self interfaces with the world that we have, that in itself is a unique experience for people who are sexually diverse, gender diverse, and neurologically diverse. That questioning is intense. Questioning is a unique experience, especially when all of those things come together in one person.
Yeah, I get you. And like, as I'm sure you know, but at like NeuroPride Ireland, we do not have this criteria of people need to be diagnosed, or you don't even need to know what neurodivergency you have. Just because so many of us don't, we know that we must be neurodivergent in some way because our experiences line so closely, but we can't figure out which one it would be, you know, this type of way. And all those people are welcome. Just like most inclusive LGBT spaces would be welcome to people that aren't too sure yet, you know, this type of way. But do you find there's many barriers in the queer community against people with neurodivergencies?
I find this one, when I was thinking about this question, I actually find it harder to answer, because I want to say yes, but I want to come at it from a more sexually typical and atypical perspective of there's a it's like the intersectionality of all things. You know, you need to be an intersectional feminist, you need to be an intersectional queer, you know, you need to be an intersectional advocate of any kind. And I believe there's barriers within the queer community, and I'm going to talk about it from a personal perspective. And I don't
Yeah.
want to sound bitter, because that's not what I'm trying to do. But I'm just trying to state a fact of I'm a I'm a woman. I'm bisexual, which creates that's a barrier, and I'm neurodiverse. So I believe that if you now I would say I'm an introverted extrovert. I have a lot of energy, but it also takes a lot for me to recharge, and I tend to not know where my energetic boundaries are. So that's something I'm learning. So I find that the queer community, unless you, especially the one that gets the most funding, the aspects that get the most funding, you know, like the bars and the cabarets and the drag and all that. I mean, and I love all of that. So I would definitely not turning my nose up at that. I love it. But I think there are barriers even in the sense of um, they're not friendly in a sensory sense.
Yeah.
They're not a there's that, and obviously it's because those places are going to attract a lot of neurotypical people. There's going to be even things like when you struggle maybe to make eye contact, or you struggle to maybe hold a conversation, or you know, you're expected to be high energy and match the energy of everyone you're around. Now I have a very amazing group of friends around me that but I've built that up over time. So I'm no longer in a place where I feel that I have to be a certain person in order to fit in. So that for me, that has left my life, thankfully, in a large extent. But it's even, like I said, it's just sensorily speaking, even those barriers are present. Um, and the fact that there is a lack of because obviously it doesn't generate as much money, there is a lack of funding for spaces that are neurodiverse friendly. And I do think that a lot of people are not educated, they're not trauma informed, and then also they're not informed in neurodiversity. So I often find myself in groups of people, um, and I will spot a neurodivergent person who's maybe in the staff, or you know, and I can see people kind of balking a little bit at, like, you know, and I don't be friends with people who take the piss out of people, um not in that way, and I don't tolerate it, um at least not anymore. But I'll often say things like, oh, do you think, I think maybe they're on the spectrum, you know, but it's not in a kind of, oh, look at them. It's like, it's just a subtle thing of like, I know they're coming across as a bit weird, you know, or a bit odd, or maybe their actions are a bit strange. And I can see the reaction in the people that I'm with, and I'm like, oh, I think maybe they potentially are autistic, or they might be on the spectrum somewhere, and I just leave it at that, and then everyone kind of is like, all right, so it kind of kills that kind of like, oh, aren't they a bit strange? It's like, well, maybe they could actually maybe be on the spectrum, and then that just, it's like, right, well, we're not there's do you understand maybe what I'm trying to say? It's like, it kind of kills those kind of oh, they're a bit weird thoughts dead, because then the person goes, oh, right, yeah, maybe, yeah, fair enough, and then that's it, as opposed to maybe spending like 20 minutes being like, weren't they a bit strange, and
Yeah.
just trying to bring an understanding to that, you know like I said, bringing like almost maybe not trauma informed in a very low level, but like being trauma informed and being neurodiverse informed. Because I know I would have absolutely been one of those people that were like, that person's really weird, and it's like, what's their problem? Or, oh my god, they were a bit abrupt. It's like, oh, no, actually, there's more to it, and it's got nothing to do with you. And yeah, so I find that's been important, and being an advocate in that sense. I don't know if I've maybe answered your question or not, or maybe I've diverged to different places, but
No, you totally did answer my question. And like, okay, I'm a dub, but Belfast is my happy space. That's where I go to escape Dublin. So the likes of Kremlin, I find far too overwhelming. Great space to be there, but that's far too overwhelming for me. Um, but I would much prefer smaller venue like Ponyhawk does being. And yeah, and like, even though that's not perfect in terms of like, it would still sometimes be sensory overloading. It's nowhere near. It's the closest I've come to in traveling to different counties of a venue, a specific venue, and a specific night that's for that gathers all these lovely queer people, and it's the closest I've had to an enjoyable sensory experience. This type of way on a night out. Because even if it gets too loud or stuff, you can go outside, and it's a nice. There's always seats. It's a nice venue, and it's a nice space, and people are always lovely there, in my experience. But like the likes of Kremlin, big huge nightclub, I find that very overwhelming. I've been there, done that. If my friends wanted to go again, I'd probably still go with them, but I get very overwhelmed there, this type of way. So I get you in terms of the places that get the funding, the places that people, unfortunately, a lot of the LGBT scene is still very club orientated, and that's not always the best place for neurodivergent people.
no, it's kind of like where Hannah Gadsby says, it's like, where's all the quiet guys?
Yeah.
Guys, go. Yeah, no, I understand that completely. I haven't had a chance to go to Ponyhawk, and it wasn't until lockdown hit that became really I realized, when you kind of, everyone's like, what's important in their life? And I realized that I wanted queer community, but not in a, yes, I love the night, like the clubs or the bars or whatever. I love that. And I love having the option to go there. But I realized what was really important for me was a genuine queer community that I could moved into, that was also conscious, and also had, like we've been talking, like that is really actively like non-binary, trans, gender fluid, woman and female friendly, because obviously a lot of the money that is in the queer community gets directed to male centered or gay centered venues, and that's okay, because to be honest with you, as a whole group, we're lacking money. But that's across the board, like in so many different countries. It's not just here. Just when we talk about the intersectionality, when we as women, just in general, we lack privilege, and then as neurodiverse people, we lack privilege, and then it's hard to then garner that kind of that money and that backing for these spaces. But whenever whenever lockdown happened, I was craving, like I was actually felt I was craving space, and I had a poster of Ponyhawk, or a little card, and with all the future dates on it sitting on my mirror, and I was like, I'll go next month, yeah, yeah, and then like not never going, and I regretted it so much, and then I started to form friendships with, and I don't know if you actually know her. I feel like everyone knows her. If you've been to Ponyhawk, you might know her. She's called Helen Gomez.
I love Helen.
Me and Helen are good friends. So Helen, once Ponyhawk hopefully, fingers crossed, starts up again, she's like, you can come with me. You can come with me, and you know, and we can have a good time. So it wasn't really until I started to, and during lockdown, and I started to realize what was important, and then I started to, I was in therapy for 2 years, and my therapist started to say things to me like when I was relaying a memory or something, she was like, sounds like that was sensory need. And I was like, you know, like when the spinning circle on Netflix starts and you're like, and because I have a neurodiverse niece and nephew who are on the autistic spectrum, and I love them. So I'd heard all of these terms and referred to them, but I was like, why is she referring to this term with me? Like, what's happening? And then so I started, she never said you or this. She was like, but that sounds like this, and this sounds like this. And I would go away and be like, oh my God. And then it wasn't until I don't know if you've ever seen Big Mouth.
Yes, yeah.
There's an ADHD character in that, and I nearly cried at the end of the episode, but mainly because it was frightening, because I could relate to him. They did a whole episode on him, and I literally was like in pure shock by the end of the episode, because I was like, that's almost crying. I feel like I'm a bit emotional now. That I was like, that's what my inner world is like, and I didn't realize it had a name. I thought that that's just like what everyone was like, you know, living off in a fantasy world somewhere, and you know, creating these like elaborate sort of interconnections of things, and you know, and not being able to focus on stuff. And I, you know, because I was a top A level student, and I went to university completely bombed. Not, I didn't completely bombed. I came out with a 2-2, you know, but I had such a hard time at university, and I was like, there's just something inherently wrong with me, and I'm now tracking back through my life, and it's like not only with my neurodiversity, but also I was a bit bisexual there, and that was a little bit ADHD there. So I'm like, to explain things, and I'm like, oh, so that's why when my mum couldn't bring 2 of my friends home one weekend, and I had to spend 3 days with them, that I ended up getting angry and lashing out at them because I was totally burnt out and I had no capacity left. And what I carried with me then was, you're a shit person, you're a bad friend. And that's what I carried with me. And now I can look back and be like, you were in complete overwhelm. You were so overwhelmed, you couldn't cope with having them around for so long. So I did completely like just go off there, but
You're fine.
yeah.
That's amazing. I'm glad that you were able to realize these things about yourself. And realize you weren't wrong. It's just your needs weren't being met at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be an ongoing process. I think for especially a lot of women, I've read a fantastic book. What's her name is Janara. I want to say Nuremberg. That could be wrong, but she wrote a book, and it's come out recently, from about March or April time. It's called Divergent Mind, and it's specifically, I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It's amazing, and she is a journalist, but she was diagnosed late in life with ADHD, and I think as well with HSP, highly sensitive person. And she wrote a whole book that was geared towards, and it was so well researched, but it was a whole book geared towards women's experience of neurodiversity, and then also then how that affects economically, how it shows up politically, how it can show up politically, but then also how the majority of neurodiverse research is geared towards men, in the similar way that, you know, like spacesuits were made primarily for men. They have realized, oh shit, we have to redesign them for women. What? God, this is so inconvenient, you know. So it's God forbid an autism, you know, a piece of research was tainted with the hormones of women, you know. that was, you know, sullied by the moon the moon hormones, you know. It's a fantastic book, and I found it very affirming, and it's very well researched. I would recommend it to anyone, especially anyone, you know, like I would obviously apply to non-binary people, not just women, non-binary, gender fluid, all of that, you know. Anyone who has a very similar experience, you know, or who maybe was assigned female at birth, absolutely would make sense. But yeah,
totally adding it to my book list.
yeah, do it. I finished it. It was so good. It was so affirming.
Good. What you call it? How important do you think pride is? Whether that be LGBT pride, Neuro Pride, combination?
Is the combination all together? I'm just going yes. It's kind of tacked on to what we've been talking about for the last
Yes.
while, the intersectionality of things. It's like, you know, sometimes I'll say to people, you know, God, I'm so glad that, you know, I'm able to, relatively speaking, move through the world as a queer person and not be attacked or whatever. And then something really heavy always sets in with me. One, that's a very grim thought to have. Actually, there's nothing positive about that. And then also, I'm not free until every woman of color is free, every queer woman of color, every trans person of color, every gender queer and fluid and non-binary person and person of color and ethnic minority. And you know, it's funny, my old therapist said to me, she was like, I believe that the neurodiverse community needs to go through its own pride revolution in the same way that the queer community has. And this was almost a year and a half ago that she said this to me, if not longer. And she was like, but they haven't quite got there yet. She was like, but they need to go through their own pride and revolution. And I think it's amazing that I'm sitting here talking to you now, where it's kind of really has started. Because when I seen it on Instagram and on social media, and I was like, oh my God, someone has actually taken up the baton and done this. This is incredible. And I can really feel the movement in all of that. So I like neurodiverse pride feels like it absolutely is completely and directly connected to the LGBTQ plus community pride. But it's like with anything, some people will be like, well, why do you need that? You know, and it's like, it's the same way. And I'm in no way directly equating what we experience with people of color, but it's the same way as people are like, well, why do we need a Black Lives Matter? You know, why do we need a Me Too movement? And it's like, we need it. We don't want to need it, but we do, you know. And oftentimes things don't get done until people start shouting about it, um, and start getting really loud and actually coming together. And this is where my history and knowledge comes in, but this always reminds me of when, and I wish I could remember all of the names, but back in the 1800s, whenever obviously Ireland was completely occupied by the British state, and Catholics were primarily tenants, and then also that Catholics who did have money and did have some sort of influence, they obviously, the only point of political power was in the British Parliament. And so the landlords would get voted in, and they were all, say, Protestant and had British lineage, or were, you know, just British. And was it O'Connell? Is that what his name was? I think it was. I want to say O'Connell. I'm going to have to go back and look this up because it's annoying me if I don't know exactly what it is. But I think it was O'Connell, but he was a Catholic landowner. And what he did is he mobilized the Catholic masses. So he created almost like a union where Catholics would pay in like bare minimum, like it was totally, you know, not totally affordable, but it was something where they were like, no, maybe this is something we could be part of. So he created this kind of group or union, which mobilized the Catholic masses, which then they voted him in. So they started to vote against, and because then, you know, if they did come across hardship like a union, then they would be supported by that group. But it then funded and supported O'Connell to get voted in. He got voted in, and the British had to accept. They were like, "Well, you're Catholic, so I don't know what you want us to do." And then eventually, they were like, "He's kind of got voted in, and you know, I don't know if we can kind of like not let them in anymore." So he eventually made his way into Parliament. That was such a formative um part of our Irish history, like, you know, to we mobilize the masses. So you drawn on our own history, you know, pride is needed because none of us are free until all of us are free, and mobilization and the amplifying of marginalized voices, just like those Catholic tenants back whatever a couple of hundred years ago, 200-300 years ago. It wasn't until those are mobilized, until the platform is given, until we realize that en masse, if we can really bring ourselves together, then that's when change happens. Because let's be honest, no one is going to do it for us. It took a Catholic to get a Catholic into it took Catholic and Catholics to get Catholic into a parliament. Just like it's going to take the amazing brains of queer neurodiverse people to have our experiences acknowledged and supported and funded and amplified. That's why pride is important, because pride's not just like, oh, we're amazing, let's slap like rainbows all over ourselves, and you know, let's tell everyone our pronouns and annoy everyone with our pronouns. Like that's not, you know, that's not the point. We're telling you these things because our whole collective cognitive our collective mentality needs to change.
Yeah.
So I hope I hope that answers. That was a very big broad answer, but
It's okay. That was a great answer.
okay.
Is there anything else you want to say before I wrap?
I think if I don't know who's going to watch this. I don't, you know, I don't know where it's going to go or whatever, or how many people it reach. But I think if you are any if you are moving through your life feeling and relating to what I've said about feeling like you're one big question mark, and the exhaustion that you feel because you're constantly like, well, what's my place in the world, and why do I feel this way, and why am I reacting this way? Um, it's never too late to find out who you are, and it's never too late to have the right people around you. And it wasn't until I started to come out as ADHD or experiencing ADHD that I realized that I had inadvertently accumulated loads of queer, neurodiverse people around me. And they were like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, it's never too late to find out who you are, and you're not alone in any of it. And this is a really exciting and important part, I think, of our history. And I feel hopeful about it all. And thank you so much for the work that all of you and your team are doing for Neurodiverse Pride, because it is a lot of hard work and it comes from very much like a passionate place. And I think what you're doing is really, really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you so much for talking to us. I could literally sit here and talk to you for hours, but thank you so much. And just Pride, NeuroPride Ireland is obviously open to anybody of any gender or sexual or attraction orientation, whether you're straight or bi or trans or cis or non-binary, asexual, it doesn't matter. But we do have to recognize that a huge percentage of neurodivergent people are queer people. And because of that, I thank you so much for having this conversation with me, because it is important that we hear from queer voices throughout this. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
See you later.